Hello and welcome to the Mariner's Library with me, Chris Stanmore Major. And in this episode we're continuing the book The Southseaman by Weston Martyr. We're just starting the second chapter, and this is the second part of the reading. The Mariner's Library is now sponsored by Edward William Insurance. Go to edwardwilliam.com to find more details, and if you follow the link in the description for this podcast, you can get a 10% discount on your next policy. Now on with the story. Chapter 2. The way to Shelburne from New York is long and hard and wearisome, which is as it should be, and if there is a road which leads from hell to heaven, the going, I expect, is fairly hard along there too. Some people like New York, and I suppose I can understand this, but to one of my temperament, New York spells hell. But when the little steamer which plies across the wind-swept tide rips of the Bay of Fundy brought us in safety in the end to Shelburne's harbour, then I knew that my idea of heaven was to be realised at last. The bay, its entrance safely guarded by an islet, fitted most exactly my conception of what a bay should be. Little white wooden houses stood round its edge upon a shore of shelving rock, and behind there rose low, thickly wooded hills, green and moss-like, with their growth of spruce and birch and fir. Upon the clear green water floated sailing craft of many kinds, and the long, low, shapely hulls of some Grand Banks fishing schooners held for a long time my delighted eyes. But a city-stricken vision was far from being the only sense this fairy place enchanted. Caulking mallets somewhere near sounded their musical notes. A blacksmith, leisurely at work ashore, sent tinklings from his anvil as from some sweetly ringing bell, and the blocks of a schooner, hoisting her sails to air, chirruped to us cheerfully like a flock of joyful little birds twittering in her rigging. Past our noses drifted aromatic scents from pine woods warming in the sun, perfumes from stacks of new-cut resinous timber, the pleasant smell of Stockholm tar, and all the rest of those variegated sea-savours which float about a place of this delightful kind. We stood for a long while silent, letting these things sink in through our eyes and ears and noses, and then George took a long, deep breath and stretched himself. "And we're going to be here 3 months," said he. "Let's get ashore quick, before it vanishes." There is only one road in Shelburne. It runs along the shore, and on one side of it stand the little houses, each in its own trim plot of garden land, and over the way, scattered among the water's edge, lie the buildings in which the fascinating work of the place is done. Shelburne's one road is short, but to get from end to end of it takes very long. At any rate, George and I found that it did, and a record of our first attempt to walk along it will show the difficulties with which we had to contend. We landed at a little wharf, intending to find, as soon as we could, those builders with whom we had been corresponding. But against that little wharf a fishing schooner lay, and her men were pitching out of her soft and yellowish slabs of some queer substance that glittered in the sun. And this, of course, had to be investigated. It was cod, we were told, salted at sea aboard the schooner, and what is more, they showed us how the salting was done, and then led us below to view the result of 3 months' labour on the foggy Newfoundland fishing banks. And viewed in bulk in the hold, that result was impressive. We had to talk about all this, of course, and see the gear with which the work is done, and it naturally led to our being shown all over the schooner. Down the forecastle, the cook plied us with coffee and doughnuts, while the skipper talked about all sorts of strange and wonderful things. But at last we tore ourselves away and proceeded. At the end of that wharf were men working in a rope walk. They were making a core cable, and this was something we simply had to stop and see. Rope making is a fascinating art, and we found out there, amongst other things, that when the steel bands which surround a tightly compressed bale of coconut fibre were suddenly cut with an axe— But this will not do. I must get on, or we will never come to the schooner. I shall merely set down here, boldly, a list of the things that George and I had to pass before we arrived at the end of Shelburne's road, where lay the yard of our boat builder. Sailmaker, sewing by hand the seams in a mainsail, 75 foot in the hoist. Sawmill, in full blast. I should like to tell you what was going on there. Cooper, shaping barrel staves, 23 a minute. Blacksmith, making hanks. Communication between smith and helper, apparently telepathic. Irate old gentleman, hoisting dory out of the bedroom window, reasons unknown. Riggers, stepping a schooner's new mainmast. Random gentleman putting ice splice in a wire bobstay, plough steel, a gory job. Timber sled drawn by long-horned ox, 1 mile per hour. Spar maker shaping mast with adze, highly exciting, etc., etc., etc. Now, I hope you understand how difficult it is to hurry along Shelbourne's road, but we did, at long last, arrive at our builder's yard. And the first things there to meet the eye were 3 vessels in various stages of construction, building in the open air. There was a very large man standing upon a stage beneath one shapely counter, and we stopped to watch him as, with an adze, he delicately sliced transparent shavings from a fashion piece. To us it seemed almost ticklish work, for one stroke inexactly made would mar the look of that ship's stern forever. But the very large man kept on hewing away, most unconcerned and calm, and when in the run of his work he came to a large tough knot, both George and I involuntarily held our breaths. But chump went the adze, coming down this time with some extra power behind it, and where that knot had been, we saw a clean, sweet cut, most beautifully grained. Said the very large man, "You'll be the gentleman, I reckon, who want us to build that little schooner. I was glad when I got your letter telling us you meant to come, for we aren't great hands down here at letter writing, and I guess you noticed that. But now you can show us just what you want, and we'll show you the kind of work we do." Then he climbed lightly down and, smiling at us, held out an enormous hand. "I'm Braw," said he, "Tim Braw, and I'm glad to see you." Now, T. Braw, manager, was the signature affixed to the end of all our letters from Shelbourne, so we knew we had found the man we had come to see. But all the same, at first we were a little surprised, because we expected to find our manager, I suppose, with a pen, not an adze in his hand. But what a man holds in his heart and his head are the things that really matter, and before many days were past, Tom Braw was to prove this to us most conclusively. Said he, "There's no hotel or place like that in Shelbourne, so if you haven't fixed up yet where you're going to stay, I'll be glad if you'll both come home with me. We didn't expect the 2 of you, but if you'll sleep in one room, Mrs. Braw can make you comfortable." I think no manager, even a top-hatted one, could have done more, and he certainly could not have made us more comfortable. And here I should dearly like to tell you something of Mrs. Braw's Nova Scotian cookery, but I must get on, for this is the story of a schooner and not a treatise on the many different and delightful ways of cooking, for instance, cod. We sat for hours in the kitchen that night before an apple wood fire that burnt, I remember, with a most beautiful rose-coloured flame, and there, most comfortably, we discussed the building of the boat, which is, without doubt, the proper way of doing business. I drank deep from a jug of mellow cider brewed by Mrs. Braw herself, and, "Now, Mr. Braw," I said as I smacked my lips, "what about the schooner?" "We haven't got anything settled as yet, in spite of those letters, and we seem to be working at cross purposes somehow. It's my own fault, I fear, because I kept changing my mind about all the things we thought we wanted. But anyhow, this is our latest idea. We want you to build a boat 45 feet over all, 34 feet on the waterline, with 11 feet 9 inches of beam. Depth in the hold is not quite 7 feet, and the draft is about 6 foot 6. We'd like her of oak all through, but from what you write, that's going to be too expensive. So we are sticking to oak for the keel, frames, beams and topsides, with the best elm you can get for the garboards and bottom planking. Otherwise, the construction is according to the specification we sent, except there are a few changes in scantlings which won't make much difference. We agree with all you said about iron fastenings, but we want bolts through all butts instead of spikes. I want a teak deck, but I can't have it, so you'll have to put down the best-looking lot of yellow pine you can find. There's a £9,000 iron keel to cast, and the rest of the ballast, about £3,000. We want in £50 pigs to fit between the floors. I don't think you'll find any very great snags in the construction, but there is one unusual feature about the boat. There's a break in the deck just forward of the foremast, and from there aft till you come to the cockpit, the beams are raised 6 inches higher up on the frames, and they've all got a 6-inch camber. I think it will look all right, but anyway, that's how it's got to be, for it's the only way to get full headroom without fitting cabbing tops or a coach roof, which are abominations, or else giving her so much freeboard that she'll look like a hearse. And I hope you won't find there's anything wrong with this construction, for I'm very proud of it, and it's very strong and gives a lot of additional room down below. The only thing is it doesn't allow any bulwarks amidships where the raised deck comes, so that anything lying around there loose is likely to go overboard. But as this boat is really meant for ocean racing, the absence of bulwarks just there is, I think, an advantage. For if she ships a sea, it can run off her again in a second or two. There's nothing to stop it. There's a 6-inch gunwale round the fore and after decks, but don't forget the teak rail, for I simply must have a bit of my favourite wood aboard somewhere, even if we have to cut holes in it for the lifeline stanchions. About this time, I took another pull on my jug of cider, for all that talking was dry work, and I had been doing much more of it than I usually do, but neither Tom Braw nor George showed any signs of saying anything, and merely sat and smoked and nodded their heads at me. So I prattled on. The boat will be schooner rigged with a single headsail and a jib-headed mainsail 50 feet in the hoist, set on a Marconi mast. We can't afford any hollow spars, so you'll have to find us some nice spruce poles. The foresail and mainsail are both very narrow affairs, so we'll have the booms of Oregon pine, as I like some weight at the foot of a narrow sail. And anyhow, the grain in a good piece of Oregon is always a pleasure to look at. She'll have wide rigging, of course, but no turnbuckles, for dead eyes and lanyards are good enough for us. The staying of the mainmast was a bit of a problem, but I'll show you the rigging plan tomorrow, and it's not such a difficult job after all. The arrangements below decks are simple enough, and for the ceiling and bulkheads you can use any well-seasoned, clear-grained deal stock you like, but the bulkheads must be doubled and boarded diagonally on the after side. The doors, panels and so on will have to be trimmed with mahogany, not much of it, you understand, but enough to give things a well-finished look below. If we were going to keep the boat, I'd say tar her and stain her a good dark brown inside, for that saves all manner of spit and polish, but this won't do, for we've got to sell her. So we'll finish her off in white with a gold leaf streak all along her covering board and fancy scrolls at the ends. We'll enamel her ivory white inside and stick in green silk cushions, leather upholstery and a silver-plated water closet, and then some ass is sure to work out an extra couple of $1,000 for her on the strength of it. Now, George, you talk, for I've said all I'm going to say. George was lying well back in a wooden armchair, big enough even for him. All buttons anywhere near his midship section were unfastened, and, encouraged by our host, he had removed his boots. His feet, encased in a pair of carpet slippers pressed upon him by Mrs. Braw, now rested on the mantelpiece, and he clasped to his bosom the cider jug. Said he, "It sounds all right, Jay, but there's a clause about delivery that's got to appear on any contract I sign." "Oh, don't go into the lawyer's side of the thing just now," said I. "We're too comfy. Never let personal comfort interfere with business, my boy." "I never do," said George. "The special clause which I desire to have incorporated in the contract will run somewhat as follows. It is hereby understood and agreed that the parties of the first page, otherwise known as the builders, and hereinafter referred to in this contract of the sale as A, shall on no account be allowed to force the parties of the second part, that's you and me, Jay, to take delivery of the vessel until 5 years have elapsed after date of her completion, or at the option of the buyers until a further indefinite period has passed. In other words, I fall in love with Shelburne, and I absolutely refuse to be torn away, and you must build us the boat, Mr. Braw, but whatever you do, don't hurry." "If you'd call me Tom now," said Mr. Braw, "I'd feel more comfortable. That Mr. sounds queer. We're plain folk round here, very plain, and that's what's troubling me. I'll say, right out, that we'd like to build you the boat, for it means bringing money into the place, and money's scarce here. But, well, it's this. When you wrote asking our price for a 45-foot schooner, you said you wanted a vessel of fisherman type, and we figured accordingly. You didn't give us her lines, but that was right, for of course we judged you wanted the usual fisherman model. But when your specifications came last week, well, we got a fright. And now I've heard what you say tonight, I understand what you want is a regular yacht with a fancy finish. I don't want to disappoint you two gentlemen, but to tell you the truth, I don't think we can do it." "Good God!" cried George, starting from his chair and showing for him more signs of emotion than I had supposed possible. Tom Braw, what a horrible thing to say! I hope to heaven you don't mean it. But Jay, old boy, he probably does, for I knew all this was far too good to be true, and we've been and staked our little all on the thing too. Damn it! Oh, this is serious for us, Tom Braw, as serious as it can be, so for goodness sake, try and do something about it." "The trouble is," said Braw, "you seem to have taken us all along for a sort of Herreshoffs or Lawleys, but we aren't, by a long way. No, we've been building wooden vessels here for the last 100 years, and we'll make you anything you like, from a turn schooner to a dory. But a yacht? Well, it's a pity, but I don't know. You see," he went on, "we aren't what you might call scientific here. We have the name for building good vessels, though, and when a fisherman along this coast wants a new boat, they usually come to us. Sometimes they bring a model with them, and sometimes they don't. They just give us the dimensions and an idea of what it is that they want, and then we build the model. It's altered about a bit, maybe, before we're done, but they're all pretty much alike. So when everyone's satisfied, we go ahead and build. And we're not like the builders you gentlemen are used to, I guess. What timber we want and spars and such we cut out of the forest ourselves. And most everything we need, we make it here. There's another thing about the way we work that I expect will surprise you. The men around here are all of them farmers and fishermen, and most of them are both. But they're all carpenters or riggers or smiths or sailmakers too. Sort of runs in the family, these things do, and have for years and years. Now, when there's a vessel to build, I go to the boys. We have a sort of a regular meeting, you see, and I tell them, "Boys, here's so-and-so wants us to make him a schooner." And then I give them the details and the time deliveries wanted and such, and then we fix how many of us will be wanted to finish the work in time. One man, maybe, counts on putting down a new field in spuds, and he can't join in, and then one or two of the carpenters have signed on for a trip to the banks, perhaps, and a smith has got it all fixed to make and lay a new line of lobster pots in the spring, so we have to count them out. But the rest agree to tackle the job or work a part of their time at it anyway. You'll understand, none of us draws any regular wages, but when the boat's built and payment's been made, then we share the money out all round according to the work each man's put in. They let me run the business end of the thing, and I fix things up generally and call myself manager on the letters. But all hands manage their own show pretty much once the work's started. Now, here's the point. All this works out very nice and fine when we're building a fishing vessel, but the Lord, He knows what would happen if we started to build a yacht. We'd get ourselves in a regular mess, I reckon, and I think it would be all too much of a risk for us, and for you too, do you see? Faced with this very desperate situation, the three of us sat there for a long time, looking very troubled indeed. At last I said, "It's my fault, George. I never was any good at business. I see now I didn't make it clear at all what sort of a boat it was we wanted. You see, I knew so well myself how she looked that I thought, I suppose everyone else would be bound to know all about her. But it's clear to me now what an ass I am, and I wish you hadn't left that end of the thing to me to make a mess of. I'm sorry, George, for I seem to have landed us both into a most awful hole." "It's all right, Jay," said dear old George. "It's my fault just as much as yours. I thought all the time that estimate of yours, Tom Braw, was mighty low. But it's our fault, I see that, and we ought to have gone into it more carefully. We're in a nasty mess, my partner and I." And then George proceeded to tell to a chorus of sympathetic grunts from Tom exactly how serious for us it was. These two enormous men, it was easy to see, had taken a fancy to one another, and I was content to hold my peace and watch them while they wrestled with a situation that had grown very much too big for me. So I sat and listened while George explained the origin of my brilliant and tremendous idea that was so pleasantly to have made our fortunes. And as I watched, I saw, under the light of common sense and experience thrown on it by Tom, my wonderful idea shrink and fade into something very small and very dull indeed. "I don't know much about yachts," said Tom, "but I do know it isn't the materials and the building of the hull itself that's so expensive. It's the finish and fittings and all the fancy work and stuff you've got to put in that runs away with the money. It's the fine finish, specially, that costs. We slapped together the sort of boat I figured on building you in a couple of months at most, and while our work is strong and good, well, it's rough, and that's a fact. It has to be, and the most of it's done with a saw and a chisel and adze. And at the price we have to build 'em for, we can't afford to waste a man's work planing and puttying and polishing up a fishing vessel, inside or out. No, we build them quick and well, but roughish, and there's no denying it. And I haven't a notion what it'd cost to build your yacht. If you only wanted a simple fishing boat now, you could come to me with her dimensions, and I'll tell you her cost within $1 almost. But not a yacht, for we've never thought of building such a thing here. Why, we wouldn't know where to begin." "Well, that seems to be that," said George, "and it's a pity. Our idea of making a nice, fat, easy living has been smothered at birth, you might say. And now we'll have to think of some other way, Jay, of earning our bread and butter money. There's one thing certain, though. I'll be shot if I ever go back to banking. I'm going to stay in Shelburne and get Tom to give me a job." "It's too bad," said Tom, "the way things have turned out. Too bad altogether, and I'm mighty sorry myself. There's all your money in the thing, you say, and your business is thrown up too. God, it's tough, that is. And we getting on so well together here and all. It's a nice little job lost, too, and the men were counting on it. And you say you'd come to us for another boat as soon as you'd sold the first? Too bad. Too bad all round. In fact, it's just plain hell, I'd say." "That's just exactly what it is, Tom," said George. "You've said it. Well, I suppose we'd all better go to bed, for you've got to work tomorrow, if we haven't." The meeting dissolved in deepest gloom, and presently I was climbing, sorrowful and slow, up the ladder which led to our attic bedroom, when suddenly a great thought struck me. It was very vague, and I was not quite sure what it was all about, but it filled me with such a sudden blaze of hope that I fell down the ladder. "Tom!" I cried, and remember, I was excited. "How much a day does the pay of your men work out at?" Tom looked surprised, as well he might, but there was a queer appearance about me just then, I suppose, and this must have impressed him. Between $3 and $4 a day," said he, "since you ask, but it's not a thing we tell to everybody." "Hurrah!" I cried. "That's done it! Why, a shipwright's pay in New York or Boston is somewhere around $8 or $9. And then I looked round for applause, but there was no applause. George was, I think, quite shocked at my manners, and on Tom's face there came a look I had not seen before. "I know it," he said. "It costs them all that to live too, but I don't see why you—" Oh, please, don't misunderstand me," I said. "I'm a bit light-headed, I think, but I'm not trying to be rude. I've just found out how you can build us the yacht after all." "Steady the buffs," said George. "You must forgive him, Tom, but he gets like this at times. Sit down, Jay, and tell us." "I know, I've been asking personal questions. I haven't a right to ask," I said, "but it's a good cause, and you must bear with me. You told us yourself just now, Tom, that the biggest cost in building a boat was labour, and that the extra cost of building a yacht, as compared with an ordinary boat, was largely due to the extra labour for getting a yacht finish. Well, if your average wages are half what they are in the States, it stands to reason you must be able to build boats more cheaply here, especially yachts. Do you see? And that being so, I can say go ahead and build us our yacht. If you find you can't estimate the cost beforehand, it doesn't matter. Charge us what it costs you plus your profit. You could sting us, of course, if you wanted to, but you won't." "What, George?" "I just said, good God, no," said George. "But, go on." Look, she's bound to cost less than if she were built in the States. And that being so, we're bound to be able to sell her there at a profit. And then we'll come back, Tom, for another and another and another. I suppose you can get that yacht finish if you try. Oh, sure, said Tom. It's only a question of work and time. We know how, all right. Well, there you are, I cried, feeling very proud of myself indeed. If finish is chiefly a question of work and time, why, the more work and time it takes, the better for us. How'd you figure that? Said Tom, as nearly excited now as a man of his placidity could be. I don't see, but go on. It's simple, I said. Suppose the finishing business takes 1 man 1 month. How much would it cost to do it here? $4 multiplied by 30 is $120, but a man's work in New York for a month costs about $250. Now, how much extra work do you think the finishing really requires? I don't know, but say 6 men for about 5 weeks. Here, go on. All right then. Total cost of finishing yacht at Shelburne, say $720. It would take nearer $2,000 to do it in New York. By gosh, said Tom, I believe he's right. You are right. And there's another thing. I mean, the men in New York won't work so hard as we do. So a job of 6 of our men would do in 5 weeks what it would take 10 men in New York, a couple of months at least. Why, bless me, if I don't think but you could have got all our fortunes made. For if you could sell the boats, we can make 'em. Jay, said George, who said you weren't a businessman? You're wasting your time, I think. You ought to be running the Standard Oil or something. We'll thrash this thing out tomorrow. Aye, Tom? You bet we will, said Tom, and it's my belief between us we can make it work. Then George gave a big sigh. For this blessed relief, much thanks, said he. We all grinned happily at each other. The varied emotions of this day have been too much for me, sighed George. Let's go to bed. Well, that's all for today. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. The next instalment will be available in the Mariner's Library shortly. And remember, of course, you've got all the content over on YouTube and the Mariner podcast, and of course Patreon at patreon.com/The Mariner. But for now, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, I hope that you're safe and sound, and I look forward to speaking to you in the next one. Cheers.